First of all, I just want to thank everyone for allowing me to have the opportunity to be here this morning. And Gene, thank you for your nice, kind introduction. I too want to express my, first of all, our concern about everyone that's been impacted with the hurricane, definitely the loss of life, people that are still struggling, and then also everyone that's out there helping with the relief. It takes a tremendous effort for that. And I know as bad as it's been with the flooding, I also know that if we didn't have the level of forest cover that we have here in the South, it would have been a lot worse. We should never, ever underestimate the importance of what we call the green infrastructure that really holds those systems together as much as possible. And as we continue to see storms that come in at a higher intensity than sometimes we've seen in the past, it's going to put more and more pressure, more and more stress on those systems. And not only outside our cities and our forested landscapes, but also within our cities too. So it's just another one of those key roles that forests play that often they don't get the credit that they deserve. So what I really want to be talking to you about today is really the benefits of forests. The clean air they provide, the clean water, the biodiversity, the recreational settings, the jobs, the quality of life. But right now, there's not a lot of willingness to pay for that clean air and that clean water. So that's where you come in. We need markets to be able to maintain our forests. And that's what I want to share with you today. Forest products are a key to really sustaining our forest areas, and especially here in the South, where the majority of our forested land is privately owned. And as much as I want our private landowners to keep their forests forested for all the right reasons, there's only one reason they can stay forested, and it has to be economically viable for them to keep their lands forested and for them to have enough economic activity that they can afford to be able to also manage those lands. So those are the things I really want to talk about. I think it's great that we have a series of events this week, including with the National Forest Products Week, but then also we have the National Bioenergy Day that's on October 19th. Just another new emerging market for forest products, and that was when it comes to energy. So at the Forest Service, our mission is fairly simple. Is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests for the benefit of present and future generations. And I want to stress the nation's part versus the national forest. Because, especially here in the South, but throughout the country, the majority of our forested lands are privately owned. So we take a lot of great pride in not only having the stewardship for the 193 million acres of national forests and grasslands where we have the direct responsibility to care for, but also the work that we do through our state foresters to be able to provide technical and financial assistance to be able to maintain and sustain forests on our private ground. Most of the products today that there's a market for or some form of consumption. But the thing I want all of us to also remember, and it's not just the saw timber, it's just not the lumber, but so many different products are made from wood. Everything from our packaging. If you think about it, almost every package, everything you see that comes in a package is derived from some wood. Whether it's cardboard, whether it's paper, whether it's the shipping crates, the pallets, it's everything. It comes from wood. I also have a prop here somewhere that, just another example of here using paper versus that plastic back there. It's just another use of wood. I also want you to think about the energy. Many communities now rely more and more on wood to provide energy for their heating and also in cooling. In fact, a third of the children in Vermont now, their schools, a third of the schools in Vermont are now heated by wood. The other thing is stuff like our cellulose gums that are in toothpaste. A lot of folks don't have any idea of the various products that are produced from wood. And what's so impressive is what a great job that you've been able to do is to find so many different markets so that we can use every bit of that biomass that needs to be removed to be able to maintain and sustain our forests and to turn it into some type of economic product. Another one that I want to talk about is water. And right now there's not a lot of market for water. However, there's more and more of our communities that are recognizing the importance of water, and especially the importance of clean water, and how much money can be saved by reducing how much filtration treatment plants have to be put in place if you have clean, usable water that comes off of our national forests. I tell you, we've spent a lot of time during my time as the Chief of the Forest Service to stress this point. And I tell you, I take some pride in knowing that when I'm with my counterparts from the EPA and they talk about clean water, they talk about having healthy forests. And if you want to have clean water, you need to start with healthy forests. And the more people that understand that, it's going to help us to be able to do the work that we need to do to be able to maintain these forests. 53% of Americans get their drinking water off of the nation's forests. 53%. And I think about those communities that have made the investment in those maintaining their watersheds in the billions of dollars that they save every year by foregoing additional treatment and filtration. If we could ever somehow get full recognition of that, or ideally get our private landowners to receive some compensation for that clean water that they provide, I'll tell you, it'd make our jobs a lot easier. But that's for the future, definitely isn't what's going on right now. I want to stress the work that we do with our partners. Everybody from the states and the folks that are in industry working together to be able to maintain our forests. It's especially important here in the South, which is commonly referred to as the wood basket of the nation. The forests down here are incredibly productive. And although they make up only 2% of the global forest cover, the forests here in the South produce 12% of the industrial roundwood and 19% of the pulp and paper products, far more than any other nation. In 2011, the South alone accounted for 63% of the total timber volume harvested in the United States. There's no question about the importance of the economic engine that our forests provide here for this region. In forestry and forest products industry in the South, they generate about $250 billion per year, or about 2.7% of the region's total economic output. And I know that Gene has some posters out here in the lobby that talk specifically just about South Carolina. But it's the number of jobs. So throughout the South, it's 1.1 million jobs. And I think the poster outside there talks about over 90,000 jobs right here in South Carolina. You know, our forests are also a part of our national heritage. I believe they're just part of who we are as Americans. They're part of our lifeblood, socially, economically, and ecologically. And they're also, I think, a key part of the well-being here in the South. And it's not just the jobs that they provide, not just the economic activity, but really it's our quality of life. Why so many people want to live in this part of the country, and yet another threat that's occurring is more and more people want to continue to not only live here, but also move to this part of the country. So it's starting to create, those are the risks that we're dealing with. We're also dealing with the risks of climate change, regional droughts, and the increased frequency of disturbance events. And whether it's hurricanes or floods or rain or drought, we're seeing that all over the country. And then also worsening fires and longer fire seasons, and the invasives that you've had to deal with over the years down here to be able to maintain your forests. And then there's the land conversion that's occurring that in many ways may be the #1 threat to forest here in the Southeast. We talked about water. Now I talk about air. 12 to 14% of the CO2 that's emitted every year in this country is sequestered into the nation's forests. So if you think about the difference, if we didn't have the forested landscape in this country that we have today, especially here in the South, think about the difference we'd have in our air quality today. It's an incredible economic service that's provided, and very few people recognize this. And if we think about, if we lose the productivity of our forests, if we lose the amount of forested acres that we have in this country, it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to maintain that carbon sequestration. In fact, one of the studies that our scientists have put out, they recognize that if we do not stop the amount of land conversion that's occurring, and if we don't take steps to improve the overall health, improve the age distribution of our forests here in the South, that in the future, regionally, there will be areas that will go from being a carbon sink to a carbon source. The day that Americans fully recognize that will be the day that there's more and more support for what you do to be able to maintain forests. But I lay that out here just as an example of some of the things we need to be thinking about as we talk about what we do and why it's so important that we're able to find markets to be able to maintain our forests. And I think about fire. And yes, we don't have as many big fires here in the South that we've had out west. But I know that our folks are finding it more and more challenging to be able to do the annual burning that we need to occur to be able to maintain our national forests. And so when we get droughty conditions, it's much more difficult to be able to control those prescribed burns. And as you folks know, that if you miss a cycle or two of having fire burn through those stands, when you do put fire into there, it becomes so difficult to be able to control it. And then we deal with those problems. So it may not be the large catastrophic fires that we see out west, but just the impact on our ability to be able to use fire, to be able to maintain our timber stands here in the South is going to become a more and more pressing problem we're going to have to deal with. Another point on the land conversion. We have one study that between 2000 and 2030, that we're projecting there's going to be an increase in housing density on over 57 million acres of forest land nationwide. And once again, a big portion of that's here in the South. But when you think about 57 million acres, that's an area that's larger than both the North and South Carolina combined. So if we're going to be able to maintain forests, be able to maintain the forested landscapes that we have here, we're going to have to find ways to be able to continue to deal with the threats that our forests face, but at the same time to be able to find the markets so that it is economically viable for people to stay on their land. One of the things that we've done with our Southern Research Station here is to put out a series of forecast models as part of the Southern Forest Futures Project. And some of the things that they determined that would come out of that we have to be ready to deal with is not just the land conversion, but we also need to be worried about the water, because the water resources in the South will be threatened in terms of both availability and quality. As I mentioned, with the extended fire seasons, it's going to make it much more difficult for us to do the prescribed burning. Invasive species will create the potential for more future ecological changes and economic losses. The growing populations and demand for forest-based recreation on a shrinking base of available forest land, and threats to species of conservation concern will be especially concentrated in the coastal plain and in the Appalachian subregions. And as you know so well, I mentioned a couple times, private landowners control the future of forests in the South because 83% of our forest lands are in private ownership. And these private ownerships can change. We've seen that change occur over just the last decade or so. And so it's one of the things I believe we need to be concerned about. The other thing we need to be concerned about is that wood gets a bad rap. And there's a lot of reasons for that, not a lot of facts. but there's a lot of reasons that that's occurred. And we've gone through a time in this country where there was a lot of opposition to cutting trees. Folks felt it was just the wrong thing to do. It was based on some misperceptions that folks were able to connect with a lot of Americans. And they didn't use facts and they didn't use figures. They just connected with the heart, with people's passions and their emotions. And they were very successful to really give wood a bad rap. But it's one of the things that I think we can change, and we've been making really good progress to really turn that around. And I think the more that when we talk about the work that needs to be done, the industries that are needed, they're for one reason, and that is to be able to maintain forests. And the more that we can shift that perception about the reason we're cutting trees is not only to produce the products that we need, not only to produce the economic activity that we need to be able to keep people employed and keep them in the business, but the end result, the output of all the work that we do is for one reason. It's to be able to maintain our forested landscapes in this country, for that full mix of ecological services that they provide, that Americans basically get for free, basically get to take for granted. And I think that's the thing that we need to strive for as we talk about our different markets and what really needs to be changed. When I think about wood, it's the most, by far, in fact, it is the renewable, it is the green building material. So the idea that folks wouldn't want to be using wood, and I think if they understood that by using wood in their homes and using wood in their buildings, it helps to maintain a forest. It doesn't result in deforestation. It doesn't result in less forests. It actually helps to maintain our forests. And that's one of the things that we want to continue to work on. We also need to find new markets. And it's not just the housing market that we've relied on a lot and the pulp and paper that we've relied on in this country, but as everyone knows, with the global economy, markets are more difficult today. So we need to look for ways to be able to expand our current markets and actually build new markets. Through our forest products work and through some other partners, we are promoting the use of small diameter woody materials that can be removed from our forests and then be produced into mass timber. It's one of the things, in fact, we have an exhibit up in Washington, D.C. right now at the National Building Museum. It runs till May. It's about using mass timber. And it has the products that are in there, using the CLT products there. But the most important part about that demonstration is it has the facts and the figures about why building with wood is better than building with steel and concrete. Now, we need the steel and concrete industry because we're going to have we have a lot of large buildings. And where wood buildings are never going to replace our skyscrapers, we are having, through a competition that Secretary Vilsack started over a year ago, we now have awarded grants to 2 companies that are actually building 2 tall buildings made out of wood in this country. There's also a 3rd building that's going up in this country. And then there's a 4th building going up in Vancouver, BC. The one in Vancouver, BC, I was told is going to be 18 stories. The ones that we're building in this country, I think, go from 9 to 12 stories. But they use wood. And at the exhibit, it shows that this is not only a very durable product, it has the strength, but it also talks about the energy reductions by using wood versus concrete and steel. Now, using mass timbers is not going to replace any markets. Hopefully, it'll just add that additional market. Another reason, another way that we can keep people employed and find another use for wood. We also need to be thinking about it for energy. And just as I mentioned, in places like Vermont, where the schools are using wood, we have other places where the Department of Defense is working with us to heat some of their hospitals and things like that. And we're trying to use the federal government as an example of being able to use wood for energy to produce for heating and cooling. That too will help us in another way. We also have the pellet export market, and that's a big part of what this conference is about, is that export market. I had the opportunity earlier this year to meet with folks over in Europe about the export market. And I'll share with you, I was quite surprised about the perceptions. Because the perception over there in the European Union was that the pellet production that's coming out of the southeast, and it currently makes up about 3% of the biomass that's removed from the land each year. Their perception is that it is creating deforestation throughout the southeast. And I can tell you those folks believe that. And they believe it because of a picture. One picture that's being used, I'm already tired of looking at it, but folks have been very successful to sell that pitch. And they say it's because this is what's going on, and they show an area that's been basically harvested, clear cut. They don't talk about what's coming next, that the area will naturally, in this case, will naturally regenerate. They don't talk about that. They're just making this plea basically on the heartstrings of folks in Europe that actually need wood to be able to meet their renewable energy demands. They really have no choice. There's no way they can produce enough through geothermal or through solar or through wind. They need wood. So there's a market there. Our challenge is to be able to maintain that market by being able to convince folks that how we manage here in the United States is on a sustainable basis. And that yes, areas get cleared, areas get clear cut, but then they're regenerated, they're replanted, and we are able to maintain those areas as forests versus being converted to a parking lot, to a subdivision, or to some agricultural use. These are the challenges that we have. The other key issue that we're facing is that this question on sustainability. So when I laid out our forest inventory and analysis information about, well, actually our forested landscapes, our forested state in this country has actually been growing since we started the pellet market. And folks were quite surprised at the number of permanent plots that we have throughout this country that we've been able to maintain now for many decades, to be able to show us that we can track our forests, the condition of our forests. We're also even tracking the carbon stocks in our forests. I can tell you that data helped me to at least make an inroad to start to get folks to think about what's really going on here in the United States versus a picture. But I raise that point for you as a challenge. We have the challenges of climate change, where actually our forests are going to help us to be able to adapt and mitigate impacts. We have challenges with invasives. We're going to continue to build the science and be able to do the management, to be able to, our forests to be able to maintain healthy forests and deal with invasives. But I can tell you we need the markets. We need our domestic markets, and we need our export markets to be able to maintain, I think, the amount of economy that's going to be necessary to maintain our forests into the future. So a key part of that is for us to always be able to have the data to be able to show that we manage in a sustainable way here in the United States. And I don't mean on every acre, because there is land changes that are going to occur. But we need to be able to demonstrate and be able to show that, at a regional level, that we are maintaining our forests in a sustainable way. And I can tell you that if we can convince not only everyone here in America, but if we can convince the future export markets and current export markets that that's the way we're managing, it'll be a big lift for us, and it will take away some of the negativity that some folks are using about some of our markets. It's going to take all of us to have that consistent message about what we do. We are committed to work with our partners. I give Gene a lot of credit. He insists on the FIA plots, I think, are read here in South Carolina every 3 years now, 5 years, because of that data. And that data is helpful, but I'll tell you what's also important is that we have this consistent message that comes from all of us, whether it's folks that are in government, whether it's folks that are elected officials, whether it's folks that are in industry, whether it's our community leaders, that if we can share this information, provide the data, that we all have this consistent message, it will make a huge difference. We have so many examples here, and that I have to admit I got a little defensive when folks were being critical of the work that was going on in this part of the country. And especially when I think about the work that's been going on with longleaf, to be able to restore longleaf forests back to this part of the country. And the work that's going with our private landowners that are willing to make that change, to forego some of their short-term profits, to be able to have a longer rotation with longleaf, but to provide for that biodiversity is so essential, to be able to provide a habitat for a couple of key species. And then I hear criticism that we're not managing it in a sustainable way. I have to admit I get a little defensive. But I want to change that by just being a little more optimistic and sharing more and more powerful stories that we have about how we're managing. So those are the things that I want you to think about as you go about your business here. There's just no question we need the markets. But we also need to be able to shift and change this perception once and for all that wood is a good thing. It's a renewable building material. It's a renewable energy source. And it takes management to be able to maintain our forests. And as much as some folks would think that you just need to leave it alone and it'll be fine, and there are certain parts of this country there's probably a little bit of truth to that, especially if we didn't have the 300+ million people living here. But we do. And especially with the threats that we're facing today, the shifts in climate change, which makes it more favorable climate for every invasive that I'm aware of, the disturbances that we're going to continue to see increase, it's just essential that we find a way to maintain these forests. And from my view, there's only one way to do that, and that's through markets and that economic activity. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here with you today. Thank you for what you folks do. I don't think you get the credit for really what you do, what the outcome is from your work. And it's one of the things that I'm going to look for more opportunities to be able to share that message. That if everyone could get to the point where when it comes to our integrated wood products industry in this country, the purpose of that is for one reason. That is so we will have forests, not only today, but for our future generations. So they too will get to have the clean air, the clean water, the biodiversity, the recreational settings, the economic activity, the jobs. But most important of all of that is the quality of life that's provided through our forested landscapes. And it feels great to be able to kind of take that for granted. But I want all of you to know how much I appreciate what you do. So thanks again for giving me the opportunity to be here with you.